In the words of one of my favorite leadership authors, Brené Brown, clarity is kindness. I honestly think that this is the kind of thing that any leader should be really considering, because the whole purpose of this podcast is to talk about how to be a great leader without being a tyrant and being kind to your people, because that helps you to be better to your customer base too. And this is one of those topics that I think really falls into that, to help your own people to understand exactly what needs to happen if, heaven forbid, something happens and you've got a crisis. Welcome to the Nice Business Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Train, executive coach, leadership and culture consultant, and I'm joined by my good friend, Jim Bob Howard, veteran technical consultant. Together, we have more than 60 years combined of business and organizational experience. The purpose of this podcast is to have short but meaningful discussions about the people and culture side of business and how owners and executives can be both kind and successful. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Nice Business Podcast. I'm Richard Train, your host, and I'm here with my longtime good friend and co-host, Jim Bob Howard. And we are very happy to introduce you to Jennifer Rice, who is a crisis management PR specialist. And Jennifer, I got to tell you, since you and I had our initial conversation, I really can't tell you how excited I am to have this discussion, because I think it is so necessary. It's something that businesses of all sizes really need to think about, and nobody ever does. It's almost like talking about insurance. It's incredibly important. You never want to have to need it, but heaven help you if you don't have something in place.
It's so true.
Before we get into the conversation, let's talk about you. Why don't you give us a bit of information about who you are and why we're having this conversation?
Sure. My name's Jennifer Rice. I'm a co-founder of J&R Communications. I have been doing PR for, it's hard to say this, over 30 years. So I have developed a lot of great relationships in the national media and local regional media. But one of the things that I have found by working from clients all the way from Fortune 500 companies to little small plumbing companies even, is that the one thing that they have in common is you're only one major crisis away a lot of times from your whole business crashing on you. So I want to prevent that. I hate to be scary, but I want to help you prevent that today, if possible.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things that we talked about, because what has been in the news recently was that Coldplay concert, where the CEO was there with his, who was it, his HR manager, and they were having obviously apparently very public, an intimate moment when there shouldn't have been. And it was really really affected the company. And it was a holy cow moment. I'm using nice terminology. that the company had to figure out what to do and how to navigate that.
Right.
Now, obviously, that's not the kind of thing that we necessarily have to be talking about to still impact the business, is it?
No, it's not. It is something, though. It's not a scenario that you're going to come up with when you're sitting down doing your crisis communications plan. I do have to say it's one of those scenarios that you're going to have to put as the other to be prepared for, because something like that's not always going to happen. What are the chances that they showed up on that cam with all the people in there, right? But that company had to scramble really fast and figure out how they were going to handle it. And I'm pretty certain that they did not have a crisis communications plan in place, regardless of the size of their company. And you would be surprised at the smaller companies that are prepared for crises much more than the bigger companies are. They're thinking about that big picture.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, Jim Bob, I'm sure you and I could both, bring up memories of businesses that you've been in where there's been some sort of a HR crisis or something like that. But I'll tell you, one of the things that kind of came to my mind preparing for this discussion was there was a business that I was the general manager of, And there was a young lady who worked for me who had a husband who was very controlling and showed up on more than one occasion demanding to speak with her, disrupting the business, but being very belligerent. And of course, you have to wonder what's going on. You see situations where somebody comes into a business with a gun or something like that, and heaven forbid does something. But even if they don't, it is a crisis that happens, whether something terrible happens or even if it doesn't, it's still a business disruption.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the one thing that we have to keep in mind now that we didn't, I guess, 15 years ago is that situation where that employee coming into the office and causing the disruption could have stayed local in their office if it wasn't for social media. But now we have social media, and anyone that I'm sure heard any of that discussion, it's a 24-hour news cycle. People are going straight to social media.
Sure.
So when a crisis happens, you have 2 hours to get on top of it before social media takes off and creates their own story.
Wow.
How do you even start categorizing the things that could possibly go? I'm thinking about these couple of scenarios we talked about, but like, I don't even know how you prepare for those. But what other type of crises are we even talking about that affect companies this way?
Well, it sounds little to us, but maybe an ingredient being found in a food. If you're working with a CPG brand and there's an ingredient found in there, maybe a piece of metal, or maybe, God forbid, the fact that it was something that was that would cause an allergic reaction. You have to look at your company and you have to sit down and think, what are 5 things that could go wrong with our company that could really destroy us? And the Coldplay thing would not have been on that list,
right,
obviously, but you have to think about things during production. If it's a product, you have to think about manufacturing, making sure everything is being done safely in that way. And there are a couple of other things that can happen with crises. Is that a crisis can even be something as small as a Yelp review or a Google review that can't be removed. And with a lot of companies, that is where all of the referrals are coming from. People are going online, they're reading those reviews. And one of the things that I tell people is that's one of the first things that you have to prepare for is your online reputation. That's one of the very first things that I would make sure that you have a plan in place to, if you get these negative comments, if you get any crisis coming up through social media, that you know how to handle those, that you can actually pull them offline. That's my suggestion. Don't ever get into an argument with someone on a review or say that wasn't our client, you've never been here, that kind of thing. Take it offline and have them contact you by phone or by text. So that way the world is actually seeing that you are acknowledging this issue and that you're taking care of the problem offline, and then they don't have to follow the whole process. But basically, it's just sitting down with your entire team and coming up with the 5 top things that could really damage your reputation and be a crisis that could damage your company. Gotcha. I have handled crises, everything from a love triangle shooting in a parking lot.
Wow.
Yeah, which was huge, to something being found in the production line of a product being made and sold.
Right. So what I'm hearing is step 1 is to first identify what kinds of crises we as a company might most likely face.
Yeah.
Is that step 1, or do you expand it beyond that?
That is step 1. You would sit there and just kind of brainstorm over a day or two over the crisis that you believe could come in and damage your reputation. One of them, if you're a plastic surgeon, of course, that's going to be bad reviews. That's going to be social media posts. It's going to be, you have to know the outlets. And also, you need to have a monitoring system. If you are using social media for your company, You need to make sure that you have some sort of an alert system that notifies you when there is something posted about your company.
Mm.
And that way you can get on top of it before it gets completely out of control. So it's a social media monitoring system.
So even I would say even if you weren't using social media, like still you're still gonna get that engagement, or you're still gonna get that bad comment that goes out on maybe some platform that you really aren't on. Maybe you're not on TikTok and that's where it gets posted. Like we're not using that for a marketing tool. How do we monitor something like that? Or maybe, let's go even beyond the big ones that I could name that we're not part of. What about other places?
Yeah, well, there are monitoring tools that you can get. I believe Meltwater is one of them, but there are social media monitoring tools that will actually monitor all of those, including Reddit. And of
Yeah.
course, Reddit is one of the ones that a lot of these crises start building up
Blow
in,
up
is
on, right.
that they really blow up in Reddit. So I would highly recommend a monitoring system that can just keep up with it, give you a daily report of how many times that you have been mentioned on these sites, make sure that they're all clean, and then end your day. Come back in the next morning and just keep an eye on that monitoring software.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So say something happens. Say somebody
Uh-huh.
says something, whether it's warranted or not. Well, let's
Right.
talk about that. Let's break that up. Let's say something happens that is unwarranted. They're saying something that isn't so, or didn't actually happen, or didn't
Mm-hmm.
happen the way they say.
Right.
Once that happens, once the cow's already out of the barn, what do you do?
Well, if it's on social media, it depends on if this is something that's gone out into mainstream media, social
Mhm.
media, or digital media. So
Okay.
you have to realize they're all moving really, really fast. But of course, social media is the one that we have to grasp really quick because you
Right.
have a very short window. What I suggest a crisis plan needs in place is you need a crisis response team. That's one thing that you have to put in place right away with clearly defined roles. So no one should be guessing who's in charge when a crisis comes up. You should have 1 to 2 spokespeople that are carrying the exact same message to make sure that they're sharing the same message across all platforms. And also, we would have pre-approved holding statements for the most likely crisis scenarios your business could face. So once we come up with that list, then we will come up with statements that will just kind of sit there in your library. Hopefully they'll never be needed, but there's a good chance one of them or 2 of them will be. You need a media protocol. Who speaks to the press? What do they say? And what do they never say? I think that's just as important as what they say. You need an internal communications plan. So employees should never learn about a company crisis from the news.
Right.
Amen.
Yeah, you definitely don't want that happening. You also need to notify your stakeholders. So that's another plan. They do not need to find out in the news as well. They need to be notified before this is released in the news. Social media response strategy. This includes who monitors your social media, who responds, and when to pause scheduled content. Because what I've seen a lot of is people are scheduling out their social media posts for the week, for the month. They're
Right.
scheduling them out ahead of time. But when you have a crisis come up, you don't think about those posts that may pop up that are going to possibly be seen as insensitive
Right.
Right.
of the situation. So you have to pay attention to your social media as well and know when to pause those normal posts. Also, keep in mind what's going on in the world at this time. An example of a crisis that I was working on, they wanted me to reach out to LA because that's where their main audience was, but that was when the LA fires were happening.
Uh,
So even though this company was dealing with a crisis of their own that wasn't in California, but their clients were, I had to be more sensitive as to how we handled that. And they had to navigate whatever the current news cycle is producing at that time. But there are a lot of things that you actually have to think about. That's why a plan is so important.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And then after that, as you said, you need a post-crisis recovery roadmap. How do we recover from this? You know, what comes after the initial response to rebuild the reputation is just as important as what you put out in your statement. Does that make
So,
sense?
so many things to
Absolutely.
consider. I mean, it's just amazing because if something comes in and just throws up a roadblock, and if you don't have a way of an understanding of how to get around it and still get to where you want to be, then
Right?
that can really cause a problem. What kind of an example can you share of something that happened? Whether you share the name of the company
Yeah.
or anything, that's fine if you don't. But give me an example of something that happened where they had a plan and how it worked. What was the end result of being able to handle it correctly?
Yes, and I will tell you the name because it's a very big international company. And my job was to keep them out of the media, but I'm going to share this with you anyway because it was such a
So, what
powerful
breaking
thing.
news?
Breaking news. There, one of my clients was Ficosa, and they're an automotive manufacturer of parts, I believe, and they have offices here in the United States. They have manufacturing facilities here in the United States. They're based in Spain. When they have a facility in Crossville, Tennessee, just a little rural area on the top of a mountain. And what happened was this is where the love triangle happened. And they were all three employees of this facility. And what happened is I think wife showed up, found the two of them in the car. It happened in the parking lot. And it's very sad. She shot the two of them and then shot herself.
Mm.
Well, we had to jump up immediately because the first thing I wanted to do, since we did have the crisis communication plan in place, the company knew exactly what to do. And the first thing that they did was shut off their Wi-Fi inside the manufacturing facility
Mm.
so that rumors would not start getting out on social media. So that was in our plan. It was like, okay, this happened. We have to shut this down now and make sure nothing leaves this facility. We held meetings internally. I rushed to the site, held meetings internally to talk with the employees and keep them educated as to what was going on and what happened. So that way bigger rumors would not get started. But the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to keep that company's name out of the media. I did not want them associated with that tragedy. And, you know, the news cycle, that tragedy would have been all over the news for 2.5 weeks with their company blasted everywhere. And they did nothing. They didn't do anything to cause this crisis. So we had the plan in place. The right people knew, the exact people knew who to be the spokespeople. So we already had that set in place. We had several different statements that they could give. And there were already pre-approved statements, so no one had to stress. They also had in place, we had in place a call tree so that everyone could call the next person, keep them updated. So I didn't have to stay on the phone with everyone in the company.
Sure.
Who I stayed on the phone with besides the CEO was actually the sheriff's department. And I worked with them so they would actually do the press conference away from the entrance of the manufacturing facility and away from their signage. So that way, you know, people knew that it was a manufacturing facility, but they didn't know the name. So
They weren't parked in front of the company.
they weren't parked in front of the company. They weren't parked in front of the front door. They weren't parked in front of the sign. So we saved them a lot of recovery after that. Of course, then they had plans in place where they had therapists come in and help their clients after. So that's part of the crisis communication plan as well. So it actually ran for such a horrible, horrible incident. It ran very smoothly on the crisis communication side of it because everybody knew their role. Everybody knew what they had to do. The sheriff's department was very, very cooperative. They kept me up to date on the case so I could then update the team and keep them involved. So that is one huge crisis that actually turned out so much better than it would have had we not had a plan in place. And
Right.
I know I told Richard, I spoke at Middle Tennessee State University to the PR students 3 weeks after that shooting. And I asked them, they were only 20 minutes away from the manufacturing facility, so they were close. I asked them if anyone had heard about this shooting. Crickets. No one had heard about it. So I said, this is PR, this is crisis management, and I did my job. So
That's excellent.
yeah,
So that definitely sounds like it falls into that other category, right? It had nothing to do with what they're manufacturing, had nothing to do with their production line, had nothing to do with, their products, failing somewhere, fantastically. It was an event that happened in their parking lot that happened to be between people who worked there. How do you formulate, what the standard things you're going to say about something like that? You're like, obviously it's not, well, if a love triangle happens to have a murder
yeah,
suicide in the parking lot, here's what we're going to say. No, it's the anything else, right? How do you have a
right.
statement that covers anything else?
Right. If an
Well,
asteroid happens to fall on our company and blow up our line,
Exactly. How do we, right?
yeah, how do we not blow this up? Basically, I have a formula in place for them, and what that formula that I had in place is we don't talk about the incident directly. We're not giving details. We're not withholding anything. We're being 100% honest. We're telling them what we know, but we're not saying, because we don't know for sure, that it was a love triangle.
Right.
There were 3 employees involved in a situation in the parking lot that escalated, and our staff had, we're really sorry that this happened. We have therapists coming in right now to console our employees and talk them through them, because they all knew these 3 people.
Right.
So it was showing what they were doing after, but it was tell the truth, tell them what happened, but you don't have to be completely specific.
Yeah.
Be honest and be the first one out there with the statement, because if you wait too long on that statement, or you don't make a statement at all and you just say no comment, a lot of people take that as guilt.
Yeah.
complicity.
And yeah.
This reminds me
Right.
of the movie The Queen.
Yeah.
Right, where when Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed died, and the whole movie is about the crown's non-response, right?
Absolutely.
And how everybody responded to that, and how quickly that escalated, and what that really looked like. And so that's one of those
Sure.
things. Obviously, they didn't have, they weren't like, well, if something happens, what are we going to do? But obviously, things like that had happened before. But in this case, they decided that, hey, she's not part of our family. But
Yeah.
they didn't act as though the public believed that, right? Which
Right.
is what the movie kind of explores a little bit. But they brought that into mind when
That's
you don't
true. I
make that
hadn't
first
thought
statement, right?
Yeah.
Who does?
Yeah.
Right.
People
Well,
start making that assumption for you.
Right.
And the thing is, I get the response or the feeling that some people may want to say, well, I just don't want to give it any oxygen.
I get that.
And I get that too. However, you also have to be, at least in my opinion, you have to at least be conscious of the fact that you may not want to give it oxygen, but if it's getting oxygen from someone,
Yeah.
and you are not going to be leading the story, then somebody else will.
Yeah. And it
And that,
really is.
that can be a problem.
Yeah. And like I said, the news cycle doesn't wait.
No.
Social media doesn't wait. Your competitors will not wait. If your
Right.
competitors get word of this, they're not going to wait. So a crisis plan puts you, and it cuts your response time dramatically. You're not starting from scratch. You're not panicking and running around a room. What are we going to do? Everybody knows their role, and it went off so smooth. It was actually a little eerie as to how smooth it went off. It worked out well for the company. I hate it, of course, for the families, but it was something that kept this company afloat. They weren't to blame for it, and they were able to move on from it very quickly.
Well, in the court of
You know,
public opinion, you immediately end up with if someone who is close to it doesn't say something, the
Yeah.
public opinion believes that they're hiding something, that they knew about it and
Oh,
they didn't
right.
do anything about it, or they could have done something about it, but they didn't do anything about it. Why did they let these people work together when this thing was going on? And like, well,
yeah.
we had nothing to do with it. We didn't know, like we don't get into people's personal lives.
Yeah.
Something happened in the parking lot among some of our employees. It escalated. There were some unfortunate events. We're dealing with things, and just saying that just kind of reminds people it's not the company's fault
No.
in this
No.
situation, right? But then there
Yeah.
are situations. What about the situation where it is the company's fault, where it is
Mhm.
something in manufacturing or something on the product line or something that happens that there does end up being some fault, and maybe even at the beginning when you don't know if it's the
Yeah.
company's fault or not, but it could be. How do you handle
Let,
that?
let me see. Hold on. I have a note over here that I took earlier that it was just a strong point that I wanted to make.
Okay.
Let's see.
And you know what, Jim Bob, further to that point, I can give you a for instance. I've worked in businesses in the past where trucking and shipping has been involved,
Right.
and you've got fleets of trucks,
Yes.
and when you've got vehicles on the road, inevitably something's going to happen where you might accidentally do some damage to somebody's car. Somebody runs into your truck, or something
Mhm.
happens, and that can be also categorized as a crisis,
Right.
Yeah.
especially if there's any kind of injury or
Mhm.
something like that, or property damage.
Right.
Well, one of the things I can tell you that just popped up here for me is some more of the notes I had taken for today is the three biggest mistakes that brands make are pretty much what we just talked about. Waiting too long to respond and hoping that it blows over.
Right.
Never blows over.
Mhm.
Responding defensively instead of with empathy and accountability.
Right.
And letting lawyers run the messaging.
Phew.
That's a big one. Legal protection and reputation protection are not the same thing. So go to your publicist, talk to your legal team later. Go to your publicist. She
Yes.
usually knows, or he usually knows the laws, the rules, and everything. And especially with me dealing with aesthetics and doctors and plastic surgeons and everything, I deal a lot with HIPAA as well. So
Right.
a lot of my crises I have to navigate the HIPAA
Of course.
rules along with it as well. So that just
Sure.
throws in another wrench. But one of the things I always tell them is lead with empathy before you lead with facts.
Yes.
People need to feel heard before they will actually listen. And again,
Yeah.
never say no comment. Instead, say we're gathering information and we will update you shortly.
Mm.
And
That's a good one.
be transparent about what you know and what you don't know. If you can do all of those things, you're going to come out of this crisis plan okay. If you can keep those golden rules in mind and then get some help from a PR team, you can actually come out of this okay. And in some cases, believe it or not, your company can even come out stronger
Sure.
because people may have a view of your business, and the way that you react to this crisis is going to change that view.
Right.
And you want it to change it in the positive and not the negative.
Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, we've been talking a lot about crisis management, and I know that
Yeah.
we're talking about it from the standpoint of helping the company, but we also have to, and part of what Jim Bob and I talk about all the time is the people side of every company.
Right.
And that's really, in large part, their people.
Right.
And so crises affect the people within the company every bit as much as it does the company or the management of the company or the ownership of the company.
Right.
And I know that you've touched on it a little bit, Jennifer, about what to do with making sure that your people are up to speed. But what is the biggest thrust as far as how to help to make sure your people are protected too?
Be open and honest with your people and be open and honest by asking them not to post any rumors on social media. A lot of times, 99% of the time, you do have really loyal people that are working for you, and they feel they're protecting that brand just as much as you are because it's their life as well. The brands that handle crises with grace and transparency are the brands that stay. They're the brands that hang around. So
Right.
that's a big part of it, is remember, keep your people in mind. Don't try to shield them from what has happened. Be honest with them and let them know what you're doing to make sure something like this does not happen again.
Yeah, yeah,
If there
absolutely.
is anything you can do. In some cases, like the love triangle, it was out of their hands completely.
Sure.
I'm sure that in situations like that, when it's a police matter as
Mhm.
opposed to just an HR thing, then, or even just a public relations thing, which is not
Yeah,
a small thing, but still, when the police are involved, that adds a whole other layer of things that people need to be prepared for, which includes being able to speak to cooperate with law enforcement. And just like what you were talking about with the situation where you were involved with talking with the sheriff's department, all
mhm.
of that, it's very important that there be some sort of a plan to make sure that the employees know that they may be required to speak with law, to be cooperating with them, but that you are, as a company, going to support them.
Right, right. Just keep that plan going. And the crisis plan that you put in place in the beginning of your business, it's going to evolve as your business evolves. I say every 6 months, you need to look at that crisis plan again. And again, sit down with your team and say, what are our 5 top things that could hurt us right now?
Right.
And it's a living document that's going to be living throughout your entire company life.
Yeah.
Let me see, there was one thing I also wanted to say. Every organization should have a crisis communication plan sitting in the drawer ready to go. The sector specific vulnerability, something people don't think about, is they think, I have just a little company. I probably don't have any crisis that I need to prepare for, but here are just a few. For medical and aesthetics, you have patient safety incidents, adverse events, negative reviews, and trust is everything in
Right.
that space. Hospitality and travel, service failures go viral instantly. We've
Mhm.
all one bad guest can one bad guest experience can trend nationally and internationally within minutes. Beauty and wellness, ingredients controversies, influencer scandals, supply chain issues, corporate B2B, employee misconduct, think Coldplay, data breaches, leadership controversies, but also one that a lot of people don't think about is nonprofits, because
Mm.
funding misuse accusations can permanently
Oh, right.
destroy
Mhm.
trust, and there's no getting that back. So nonprofits, I think, are probably my number one on the list that need a crisis communications plan as soon as they start building their nonprofit.
Hmm.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that opens up an awful lot of conversation, hopefully, for a lot of companies.
Absolutely.
I guess one of the main things that I'm kind of curious about is, and I don't want you naming names on this one,
Okay.
but I kind of do. But since this is going out, as a podcast, probably
I'll
not.
tell you later.
Give me an example, and it doesn't have to be a large company, of a situation that every time that they could have done something, they really put their foot in it and made it worse.
I have seen that
Give me an
a lot.
example of what not to do, basically.
Right.
Not that I'm planning on creating a crisis.
No, I have seen that happen a lot. And actually, I think I told you, Richard, a lot of people run from crises. I'm that person that I see if something happens on television and I know it's a new company and I know that company is going to go under if they don't handle this correctly. I contact the company and I offer my services for free. I offer my crisis communication services for free to help them get through this. And one of the incidents that I did that with was the October 1st shooting here in Las Vegas. And from Mandalay Bay, it was one of that company's very first concerts that they were putting on.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote them immediately. I said, let me help. I can help you navigate this. I can help make sure that you guys can keep going as a business. I don't know what's happened to them at this point because they didn't accept my help, but I know that was one thing, not naming any company because I can't remember their name, but they kept stepping in it. They kept giving the wrong answers, and everything they said was knocking down their credibility a little more and a little more. And I've seen that happen a lot. And that's always when I want to jump in and say, please, I'll help you for free. Just let me help you. I don't want your business to go under. Right. And then my fiance yells at me for always offering free services.
So if someone did want to hire you, let's say that someone wants to be proactive about these things and not wait until you're calling them saying, can I help? How do folks find you and how do they engage you in your services?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm easy to find. It's under jnrcommunications.com. My email address is jennifer@jnrcommunications.com. I'm found on Instagram. I'm found on Facebook, LinkedIn, anywhere you can find me. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to reach.
Great.
Well, Jennifer, we could talk about this and give examples of what not to do or what to do forever, but I really do appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun. And really, this is the kind of conversation that a lot of people, it's a hard conversation when you think about it for business.
It really is. And especially when companies are starting and they're thinking about all the policies and all of the practices that they have to have in place and contracts and all of that. Crisis communication always falls to the side until it's needed.
Right. And then they're scrambling.
Yeah, and then they're scrambling and stressed, and you don't need to be scrambling and stressed. What I normally do is I would have a card. This is not it, of course, but something similar to this, a laminated card that I would give each of the executives to keep in their wallet. So when a crisis occurs, they know the statements that I have written on the cards that they're allowed to say. And they know the chain. They know the chain of command, who they're supposed to call. This happens and such. So they keep this in their pocket at all times to handle that crisis when it comes up.
That's great.
Well, in the words of one of my favorite leadership authors, Brene Brown, clarity is kindness.
Yes.
And I honestly think that this is the kind of thing that any leader should be really considering. And because the whole purpose of this podcast is to talk about how to be a great leader without being a tyrant.
Right.
Yeah.
And being kind to your people, because that helps you to be better to your customer base too. Mm-hmm. This is one of those topics that I think it really falls into that, to help your own people to understand exactly what needs to happen if, heaven forbid, something happens and you've got a crisis.
And you don't want to hide anything from them. You've got to keep an open dialogue with them. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank
you for having me.
All right, Jennifer Rice, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Nice Business Podcast. We hope you got some valuable information and inspiration. We're always looking for great stories that will help your business be more kind and successful. And if you know of one we should hear or someone that would be a great interview, please let us know. To contact me, click the link here to go to my website or use this QR code. I wish you a nice business.